Hello there, my name is Betsy, and this is part two of doodling on portraiture. So we already got this drawing started in the last session at some point late last week. So right now, this is the second session. I did actually end up sitting for about an hour for this session. So as you can see, the video is maybe about half an hour, a little bit less than half an hour. So I have sped this up just a little bit because, oh my goodness, one thing that I did end up realizing is that this is taking a very long time. But of course, the truth is, I don't really mind. I'm actually really enjoying this drawing a whole lot. Just for a little bit of background information, this drawing is 8.5 by 11, so it's a letter size piece of paper. It isn't standard paper. I am using something that's a little bit thicker, so it's almost like cardstock. It really is just the type of thing that I like to use when I use ink. So that's what I'm doing here, and I'm kind of just getting started here. The other thing you're probably going to see me do a lot of is a whole lot of like gymnastics with my hands, a lot of pointing, because when I first recorded this, I really was talking and kind of just explaining things. But unfortunately, there was just a whole lot of noise in the audio, so I just kind of scrapped the whole idea and I'm just kind of doing it all over again right now. So I hope you don't mind, I'm just doing a voiceover right now. But I can still go ahead and just kind of explain to you some of the things that I'm doing. For starters, I did start kind of drawing some of those lines with the kuretake pen, but then as you can see right now, I'm switching over to a different pen, which is just a type of fine liner. It is a 0.3 millimeter Triplus fine liner that is made by Statler. And of course, as usual, I will link in the description all of the supplies that I used. I know a lot of people will ask in the comments afterwards, but if you're new here, welcome. Thank you for joining me. But if you've been here before, you already know that I always try to link everything. And it's not because I want you to buy it or anything. It's just so that you can compare if it's something you already have or if you just want to compare prices. That's really what it's for. And of course, if you are inclined to do so, anytime that you buy anything from me through my links, it just helps me out a little bit and I get kind of a slight kickback from Amazon or whatever. So I do appreciate that if you do that. But having said that, that's the pen that I'm using. It is a Statler pen. And right now, really all I'm doing is I'm just going in there and trying to create some of those little details. I did promise myself when I worked on part one that I wasn't going to fill the page from edge to edge. I just have a habit, maybe it's not a bad habit, but it is definitely a habit that I have of every time that I make all this tiny little line work that I just work all the way to the edge. So for this drawing in particular, that's my goal, is to, in a sense, kind of let the design sort of work its way outward towards the edges without actually like hitting the edges like it's like a solid line. So that's what I'm doing little by little. You can see that these designs that I'm adding to the edge are kind of thinning out. They're not as dense, which is really hard for me. I don't know. I'll have to think about why I keep doing that. I think that a lot of us who doodle really do have that habit of just kind of filling everything. I suppose it may just be natural to the art of doodling, of course. So here you can see I'm just adding lots of very simple shapes. I'm trying not to overcomplicate each individual shape. They're all just like little wedges or little leaf shapes. Sometimes I know, especially any of us who do any particular patterns or anyone who does like a Zentangle, there are a lot of really wonderful patterns and designs to be used, and I think sometimes when they get complicated, some of the other designs get lost in the process. So for this drawing, I'm just keeping it to simple shapes. So you can see I've got just a lot of swirls and just these kind of long shapes. And so I'm working right here on this kind of upper left-hand side. And so all of those thin, slender shapes that are kind of growing outwards just really organically, they're as simple as they can possibly be. They almost look like little leaves or just like little vines growing outward. And that's pretty much what I'm sticking to. You'll see each line that I add, I'm not really going with any patterns. It's actually a bit haphazard, which is exactly what I want for this drawing. This is perfect. So there we go. We're just kind of adding more of these little vines. And I really am doing my best to not put them in there too densely, I suppose. So if it's like it looks a bit like it's kind of overgrown, all of these kind of vines and leaves and things growing. And that's exactly what I'm going for, at least this time. That's now that I've I actually gave this a chance to just kind of sit on my desk for, my gosh, four days or something like that, and I just kind of walked away from it, which I really do recommend. If at any point you're working on anything and you kind of get fed up with it, it's perfectly fine to just walk away. I have been seeing comments from other artists just on different social media that I'm on about how they feel like they're just not real artists because they want to walk away from their work. Sometimes they even feel like quitting, but while we're here just kind of chatting, I really would kind of encourage you that even if you feel kind of fed up with your own work or with the things that you do, it's okay, just leave it alone. Go take a break, go do something else, even if just for the day or for the weekend. You don't have to make art every day to consider yourself an artist or a creative person. It's okay to take a break. So that's what I did with this one actually, is I kind of decided, I think I need some space. It's almost like I'm developing a relationship with a drawing, and I just felt I needed some space. So here you can see I added some really long shapes there. And I did actually end up noticing at this point that my pen had taken quite the beating with this drawing already. The pen is still pretty good, but the tip is kind of pressed inward a bit just from how I've been using the pen. I think that's one of the reasons why I have such a hard time with fine liners overall, is just I'm not very nice to them. So that's why I don't buy them very often now. I kind of stick to brush pens or other kind of ballpoint pens for now. But this pen is working fine. So it's really not a criticism of the pen. It's just me. It's the way that I use them. So I'm just going to continue kind of adding to it. Even though I'm probably going to struggle with the pen a little bit, I'm just going to keep going. It happens a lot, and I'm kind of used to it by now just because of these pens. But I have quite a few of them. I have like a whole box and a half, I think, of these Statler pens, and I want to use them up. And so it's working really nicely, though. I'm not complaining or anything. It's working nicely. I like the line work. I like the quality of the ink so far. So it's pretty good. And so as you can see, what I'm doing here is as I'm working my way around the edge there, I'm kind of adding these little circles. And I think that when I add those circles, it's kind of like a signal to myself to stop trying to draw more patterns. Otherwise, I'm just going to end up going to the edge of the page. And then I'm going to have to do a whole bunch of editing when I go back in there. But at least the truth is that I've managed to do what I wanted. So you can see here a little bit more zoomed out. I'm managing to not go all the way to the edges. And so I'm just going to continue my line work here, just adding these little shapes. The hard part sometimes for me is actually also as I head further out of maybe making not too dense. So right here I just added some little lines. And so what I'm going to show you, something that I do in case I do want it to be a little darker but not too dark, is I just do a little bit of stippling. So I'm going to select a couple of little spots here. So like here. And I'm just going to do some dots. If you don't know what stippling is, that's all it is. And so I just find little areas where I think I want to do some shading. Just really gently put in some dots. That's always one way to go. If you don't want to use any kind of gray wash or any other pen to do any shading, you could always do that, is use stippling. Of course, this would take forever. Imagine just all these millions and trillions of little dots everywhere, but it's worth it. I've known a lot of artists that create a lot of work in stippling, so it is doable for sure. I've actually made a few artworks that were stippled back in the day. I might still have a couple of them. I know that I may not have finished some of them, so maybe that's why I don't do stippling as much, but I do love it. I love it very much. So you'll notice that one thing that I'm doing here is as I'm working my way down the drawing, and I'll show you here, as I work my way down, I'm creating these sort of shapes that are angled, and that's kind of where I'm doing all my hand gymnastics here. The gist of it is really just that I want to create a lot of these lines growing in all sorts of different directions and angles, so that really just makes the drawing look that much more dynamic. If I were to draw a lot of lines that were just vertical or just horizontal, everything would look really stationary, like things aren't really moving around. And so my goal is really just to make this come to life, make it look like it's alive. So what I'm really just going to do is continue in this little area right here near the shoulder. And it's just so interesting to me as I work on this, how it's all just tiny lines. Lots and lots of tiny lines, which I suppose is the thing with so many artworks, right? So a painting is a collection of a million little brushstrokes. And this drawing is a collection of millions of little lines. And they are all quite simple. You'll see that they're all very short, simple shapes, tiny wedges, tiny contour lines. Occasionally I'll add like a little bit more ink in some places. You'll probably notice me doing that, and I will point it out whenever I do it. One thing that I do point out a lot when I'm drawing is to make sure that you're varying your line widths if you can. If you really want to make it kind of come to life a lot more and be a little less plain as you're drawing your lines, just go ahead and have fun, of course. Just do whatever comes to mind, just play around. But then occasionally go back and add to some of those lines. Make them a little thicker. You'll notice that it adds a lot more interest. But of course, it's not necessary. Do what you gotta do, of course. It's your artwork. You can do it however you want. I remember that when I was talking to a friend recently about some things that I wanted to do or some kind of artwork that I wanted to explore, and she was so funny. She looked at me and she said, "Well, you're going to do whatever you want to anyway, so why are you even worrying about it?" She wasn't wrong. I really am that way. When I make up my mind that there's something I want to do, I don't even worry. I don't care if anyone's going to approve of it or not. So if any of you have seen the way that I work, that's kind of what it is for me now. Is maybe back when I was younger, I worried. I certainly worried a whole lot. There were a lot of people's comments and a lot of ideas that were influencing me. But these days, I have certainly come to the decision that it doesn't really matter. At least not for me. I'm just trying to make sure that I share that vibe with other people as well. Anyone who's doubting, if you're doubting, don't doubt. We all start off as horrible at what we do. My first drawings and doodles, horrible. Eventually they got better. It's everybody practices, everybody makes mistakes. I'm pretty sure at some point I'm going to do something in this drawing that I'm not going to like, and I'm just trying to make sure that I'm ready for that. I can figure it out. I might be able to edit digitally on my iPad later. I might be able to just start all over. I can always add white paint and fix things. There are lots of options. For now, I'm just going to make sure that I enjoy it. And hopefully I'll learn something from this, because isn't that the point? Making sure that I learn something. So what you'll see here is I'm doing that thing there where occasionally I kind of go back. I go back to a place that I thought I'd already finished drawing in, and then I just add a little more ink. I happen to do that a lot. I kind of bounce around and just kind of something that'll draw attention to itself somehow, and then I'll just add a little more ink. So that's always pretty good. And I'm just really grateful that I managed, for the most part, to stick to the plan. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it does help if things kind of work out. So right now, the pen is doing okay still. Again, I mentioned earlier that the tip on this thing was unfortunately kind of smushed down just from how much I'd used it. And it feels like it still has plenty of ink, but for some reason it's just... I've been pressing down pretty hard on it, so it is showing signs. But it's still working. It's doing just fine. And so far it's looking pretty good. I am thinking along the way as I'm working on these little pieces here, I do try to consider what places I'm going to be adding shadows in. Now, of course, I can't entirely control exactly where my shadows are going to end up, but the way in which I draw my line work really is going to help a lot. So what I'm going to do is add these lines in following those kind of pencil marks that I made there earlier, because I do like those. So I'm going to draw these kind of long tendrils that are just heading down that way. So by creating those there, what I'm essentially doing is kind of blocking off some areas. And I'm also making it so that these shapes are forced to be in the foreground. So yeah, I'm not going to be able to control every single little detail, but I can control some details. And these are the ones where I do have a little bit of control over. So by placing these in the foreground already, I'm forcing those areas to stay kind of more light colored. And that way, as I fill in all of those gaps in between, that's where I end up putting lots of detail, lots of lines, and it inevitably ends up looking darker in those spaces. So as you can see, I'm just adding some more of those kind of long tendrils that are just winding. They're very long. They're kind of heading outwards at different angles. And I'm just doing my best to kind of connect them or to have them grow in the way that I want. And I think that it really helps me fill the page, I think, because if I just had the blank page and with nothing there to kind of split it up into smaller sections, I think it really would be super daunting. It's a big page. So I think one of my biggest tools or my biggest assistive devices is just that technique of splitting up the page into separate sections. So like you can see me doing right here, I'm just kind of going in there and just working one little piece at a time, just one little section, one little line. So all I'm doing is adding contours, and you can see that right now I'm kind of going in a vertical direction. And then one of the ways that I add a little more interest in it is to just start changing the direction. So if I'm going vertically, then make it a little horizontal or diagonal, and then add a different shape. And then I start going in the other direction. There are a lot of different ways to create interest there that don't require a whole lot of kind of premeditation. And I think that's what I enjoy about this so much. It's just really one little space at a time. I feel like in this space I just kind of scribbled. Proof of concept here. Even scribbles can look good if you try to kind of place them pretty nicely. Sometimes it just comes down to trial and error. So here you can see I'm just adding some curves and some circles. I'll be honest that at this stage, as I start getting closer and closer to the face, I do get a little bit more unsure. I'm not certain how close I want to get, if I want to draw any designs that kind of head up towards the neck. Am I going to put any clothes or jewelry on the character or anything like that? I think I just basically decided that I'm going to leave it alone. Just continue with some of those designs. I'll eventually have to tackle the face, and that's, I don't know. Hopefully I'll do okay, and we will get there. We'll get there when we get there. I'm not sure today I'll want to do it. I know that at this point in the drawing, I'd already been working on it for quite a while, and I wasn't really prepared to work on it for more than an hour. But I did keep going just a little longer. Added some more of those wonderful spirals, because I know that this is fairly representative of hair. The spirals kind of fit. Makes it look like it's got lots of curly hair. Looking at it now, though, it probably looks more like vines or plants or just little tendrils that are kind of growing and just swirling around. I know that there are lots of plants who do that, especially the trailing kind of plants, because they are growing and kind of just spinning around and trying to find something to hold on to. So they have all those little tendrils. So that's what this is probably like. It's just a lot of growth, a lot of natural little bits growing. I'm going to zoom out here, and so you'll see what it looks like as I keep adding those shapes. One thing that I like to check for when I kind of pan out and just look at the drawing as a whole is I'm trying to see if I'm accidentally starting to make all of my patterns go in one direction. And I think that at this point I was. Everything seemed like it was growing kind of at an angle down and to the left a bit. And I tend not to like that. It has to be pretty intentional for me to like it, but in this case that wasn't the intent. So what I'm going to try to do is start switching up some of the line work or the doodles that I'm putting in there and try to angle them in a different direction. So that is one of the things I'm going to be attempting. I have a habit of not wanting everything to kind of look like it's going one way. So we'll see if that works out. It probably will, I hope. I'm trying to stay positive. I don't want to end up having to stress out over the outcome of the drawing. And so I'm just kind of going to see if I can start shifting that a bit. And then one thing that I figure is that if I don't quite have things flowing in the direction that I want them to flow, one thing I can always do is go back and use my pen again, kind of go over some of those areas and change those shapes. So that's always a possibility. So that's why I'm not too worried. I can always change them a little with my pen and it might change the direction. So I just moved over to this area and started making these little loops. I actually use them a lot, and for some reason in my recent drawings I just haven't been using this design a lot. It's pretty simple. It's just, as you can see, it's just this little black seed almost, and then a little loop around it, and that's always really nice. So I'm going to show you right here something that I tend to do is when I go back to an area that I finished maybe a few days ago, I find a couple of spaces and just fill them with black. Like right here, I'm going to do it again. So that one's black, this one, that one, maybe this one here, and a few over here. And so by making them black, it just helps add to the depth a little. Even along the edges especially, I add more black. And that's kind of what I mean about flitting around and just finding a space where I think, oh, this could be a little darker. So at this point, I'm just going to switch to that gray pen. And again, it's going to be linked in the description. So this is part of a set of 3 pens from Kuretake. And this pen has ink in it that's gray. So I'm going to show you what it looks like. So like that. It's gray. And all I'm going to do is just really gently make these simple strokes along the places where things just look kind of close together. And also anywhere where those lines merge together to make little peaks, little pointed areas. Or in truth, just anywhere where I feel like it should be a little darker. I don't always have a particular kind of method. I just kind of choose, okay, so the little pointy bits like there, these guys here, all these little points, just add a tiny shadow. I do recommend that if you're using this kind of pen, if you already have one, or if you plan on getting one, this ink is very wet. And so one thing you can do if you're not sure, you can always tap like this. So see, there's lots of little tapping. You can use brush strokes, of course. Just use the brush strokes. Make sure that you are quick with it. Even in real time without the time lapse, my brush strokes were very, very fast. Because if the pen lingers in one spot for too long, you're going to soak it with the ink, and then you may not be getting the color that you want. It might just end up almost black. So I'm just doing this really, really quickly. Just lots of teeny tiny little strokes. Very, very quickly. And the truth is that I'm probably going to go over this one more time later. Maybe even 3 times. Just because each time that I look at it, I'm going to find more little spots that could be gray rather than white. So here you'll notice each one of those little peaks, those little pointed ends of each kind of line or tendril, just a tiny bit of gray. Like right here, I can just mostly fill that. I don't even have to be too delicate. So right here, these right here, and it's just all one teeny tiny stroke at a time, just because all this is so small. Even if you're a little haphazard, it still works. Just gonna keep going there. Notice it's all those little pointed parts. Those are the ones where I'm just adding tiny little dabs very, very quickly. So that would be my suggestion for using this pen, is go quickly. If your pen lingers too long, you're just going to end up making a big splotch on the page. It's almost as if you were using an old-fashioned fountain pen. So here's what it looks like. So see, already there's so much more depth. You can see the difference of the areas in which we did the shading and then areas where there weren't none. So from this angle, I'm going to continue doing a little more of that shading just so that you can see the difference. You can watch it happen as the gray is added in. And again, it isn't terribly, I'm not going to call it easy. None of this is easy. All of this creating has its difficulties, but what I will call it is it doesn't require too much of a plan. So you can be a little haphazard. You can be a little feral if you want with this one and just kind of dab, 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 dab everywhere. Just one little bit at a time, and you'll notice a difference. I think this is why, in particular, I always go back and add more later, just because I'm pretty sure I'll miss something. And I'll notice like, oh, why is that one white? Oh, I missed it. And each time I just add a little more, just little tiny dabs here and there. Every time it just adds a little more. So I'm just going to add some up here. Looks like there's a bunch of areas that could use a little bit of gray. The other thing I know I'm going to have such a hard time with is not filling the background with black. I promise I won't do that in this one. It's going to take forever if I do. So I'm just going to leave it and make sure that all the grays and the blacks are in the actual image itself, and I'm just going to leave the background white, possibly. We'll see. So overall, I think that this turned out really well, and still we're going to have to go for a third session, and I will certainly share it with you. Hopefully you're not fed up with the drawing. If you've stuck around this long, thank you so much. But it's just been so much work. I think I really will turn this into a print. I don't even know how I'm going to price it, but I'll just work on it, and I'll let things happen however they need to happen afterwards. Maybe I can ask you guys about pricing, what sounds like a good price for a print. Maybe an 8x10 would be nice after I do some edits. But this is what it looks like. I think it's turning out great. The shading is helping so much, so much. I hope that you can appreciate just how much that shading really affects it. But for now, this is the end for today. I'll see you in part 3. Have a good one, you guys. Have a great day. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.